Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Not Your Average Josh back here for another movie review, and today I am reviewing the new movie Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. And if you've been watching any of my videos, you'll know I just recently reviewed Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and I actually just watched all those movies within the last month leading up to that. I hadn't really seen any of them at all. Pretty much a complete fresh experience with that, and it was even more of the same thing with this franchise. Mission Impossible movies, I had never seen any of them, believe it or not, so I pretty much blew through them in about a week. From the first one all the way up to leading to this new one, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. So I'm very happy to give up my thoughts on this movie. But before I get into my review, as I always say, if you're watching this, hit that like button, leave a comment down below if you enjoyed this video, if you have any thoughts on this movie in regards to the Mission Impossible franchise. Also, hit that subscribe button as well if this is your first time watching any of my videos, or if you're a returning viewer as well. Any support is always very much appreciated. Also, follow me on TikTok and add me on Snapchat, where I will post content similar to this. But for the most part, my content will be here on this YouTube channel. As always, Not Your Average Josh. Again, I appreciate all the support I do get. Still a smaller channel here. If you happen to be watching this video, I appreciate it very much. There's plenty of bigger channels out there you could be watching movie reviews and stuff like that, so I appreciate it very much. But let's go ahead and get into this review for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. This movie was once again directed by Christopher McQuarrie after coming on, of course, to the franchise, of course, in the movie Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. The writing credits for this movie are also Eric Jendresen, Christopher McQuarrie as well, and Bruce Geller, of course, being credited with creating the characters on the original TV series. And if you do not know, this time, much like every other time, you have Ethan Hunt and his IMF team tracking down a dangerous weapon before it falls into the wrong hands. As I said, I just recently watched all these Mission Impossible movies for the first time. I really enjoy this franchise, like more than I anticipated that I might have. Tom Cruise, I really enjoy almost most everything he's in, so there wasn't a surprise in terms of his performance in all the movies. But in the way I liked even some of the movies, you know, like Mission Impossible 2 that some people just don't like, John Woo directing that one, I even liked some things about that movie as well, and overall I think I did just like it in general. And pretty much every movie within this franchise there is something to like for me personally. Honestly, for me, I think I may be one of the outsiders on this, but I think the third movie for me I really do enjoy the most. I think I might actually love that movie. The third and fourth movie, I will say. Brad Bird did such a good job with Mission Impossible, Ghost Protocol, and then the music also in both these movies. The music throughout this franchise been really well done, like a lot of the other aspects within these movies. But just with the third movie, J.J. Abrams having Philip Seymour Hoffman, Lawrence Fishburne in that movie, and I just really loved the vibe. I thought that's really where this franchise really caught its stride. Like, it really got going on the fast track to being a really good, consistent franchise. And honestly, watching it, even with this newest movie, Dead Reckoning Part 1, this is definitely one of the most consistent franchises of any movie series. I think Indiana Jones fell off, of course, at least I believe, with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and also with the Fast and Furious movies. Also, obviously, Fast 10 coming out this year. I think that franchise has also been on a little bit of a downturn and maybe nearing the end soon, whereas you have these Mission Impossible movies are right there with like the James Bond movies. Every movie has something for me to really enjoy about it. Every movie really somehow nails down the tone and the vibe of a spy thriller while also having those action-adventure moments throughout the movies. And this movie is definitely no different. The past 2 or 3 movies, it definitely has fed more into the action-adventure than the previous ones, where it was like more heavy with the spy thriller of it all. This movie in particular, Dead Reckoning Part 1, is very much that action-adventure for a lot of it, especially the third act of this movie. Great action sequence. Just every time you thought, okay, they're not going to have another action moment to top this, they have another huge moment in this just great train sequence that happens near the end of this movie. This whole last third act sequence that is just full-on action-adventure with your touches of spy thriller still thrown in there. And look, this movie is definitely really long. I think the runtime is about 2 hours and 45 minutes. Most people that have really enjoyed this movie have said they didn't feel the length. I differ a little bit on that. I did feel the length throughout this, but it was never troublesome. It was never problematic or anything for me. I still enjoyed the movie because it was just entertaining from beginning to end, which is pretty crazy with the runtime here, especially because it is the 7th movie in this franchise. You already know what you're going to be getting, but they somehow make the story still compelling and the characters really interesting to follow. And even of course having someone like Haley Atwell in this movie, who I really have enjoyed her. I really know her from the most from being in the MCU. I haven't seen much else from her that I know of right off the bat, but she just, it fits in this so well, into this franchise, into this movie. The chemistry she develops with Ethan Hunt, her character Grace, I thought it felt very natural. You understood why she was in this situation here, involved with everything, just gets caught up in the middle of it as an outsider, really just trying to do a job. And near the beginning of this movie, just gets caught up into everything going on with the IMF. And then everything Ethan Hunt and his crew are dealing with the villain in here, Gabriel, and then, of course, Palm Clementif's character really working together to try and get this MacGuffin that's in this movie, the key that they need to ultimately control this AI. That is really the main plot of this movie. In terms of the AI in this movie, I liked it for the most part. In the recent years, we have definitely dealt a lot with, in movies and TV shows, with this concept of AI, and it makes sense. It's very much on the forefront of people's minds. AI in real life is accelerating at a very rapid pace, so it makes sense to have this concept in this movie, and I liked it for the most part. It worked. The story was really well done, and so I didn't stumble upon anything where I was like, oh, this is getting kind of old. I do think as time goes on, much like any other genre or story elements in movies, if you don't do it so well, eventually it's going to feel old and stale. But I thought they really nailed it down in this movie. I understood and felt the threat very much. And again, this really just felt like a Mission Impossible movie. You had plenty of spy thriller moments, especially through the first couple of acts in this movie. And the third act definitely just goes way more just head over heels into that action adventure, which I really did enjoy, especially when you do it so well. The way this movie was filmed, going to this early screen, they had a little featurette before, much like they did with Top Gun Maverick, where they showed them going to all the world premieres everywhere that they shot the film at, and showing a little bit behind the scenes on some of the action spots, of course. Everyone, if you know anything about this movie, I'm sure you've seen something with the motorcycle stunt that Tom Cruise does, and it is everything that you might expect. If you enjoyed anything from if you watched the featurette or whatever that's online about it, once you see it within the story, it just works so perfectly, and how they execute it, it's really creative and well done. And just, I mean, Tom Cruise, he is literally like the last action hero. He is like literally the last real action star, one of, I will say. You have Keanu Reeves still doing with his movies in John Wick. And Tom Cruise, though, just going these over-the-top, just crazy stunts, and the fact that all the training he puts in, whatever your beliefs are about him, of course, personally, he puts his all into acting, and he really treats it like a job, and like he gives it his all. And as a film fan, a movie, a fanatic, it's pretty cool to watch someone at his age, still now in his 60s, still doing this crazy shit, jumping off a cliff with the motorcycle. It's just a crazy ass stunt. And even through the first couple acts in this movie, you have the whole chase sequence in Rome, which, watching it, I do think I had heard little things going into this movie that it was very similar to the sequence in Fast X, the Rome chase sequence. And I can see there's similarities there, but it wasn't as jarring. It wasn't like constantly on my mind while watching the sequence as I might have thought it would be, hearing certain people talk about it before I went to see this movie. It was its own thing. I really enjoyed it actually more than the Fast X sequence. I pretty much enjoyed most things in this movie better than the Fast X movie. Not that was a bad movie, but I think this is just a step above what Fast X was and what that franchise is at this point, as I already mentioned. This is more on the level of like what John Wick 4 was this year, another really long movie, another sequel into the franchise. Of course, not the seventh, but the fourth. I love John Wick 4 more than this. It is definitely still probably my second favorite movie of the year, behind Across the Spider-Verse. But I thought this movie, I didn't quite love it, but I really enjoyed it. And it was just hitting on so many different levels from the beginning of this movie. Really enjoyed seeing the character Kittredge back in here, played by Henry Czerny, I believe is his name. Especially because I don't have the history of, I haven't been watching these movies for years. As I said, I really watched most of these movies in like within a week. So seeing him back in this, it was more of just like, oh, here he is again. Yeah, it wasn't like, oh man, after all this time. But it was crazy though to see, because I was waiting for him to pop up in some of these movies, and for him to not have shown up since the first movie is really cool to see him back in here. And the character he plays as well, he's very much reminiscent of the first movie, if you remember, where you can't quite tell, is he a good guy? Is he playing on the good side? Is he with Ethan Hunt in this, or is he more playing with nefarious reasons here? And they definitely deal with that throughout this movie, and I really did like the mystery of his character. Issei Morales, I already mentioned the character Gabriel. He plays Gabriel. He is a really good presence on screen. I will say there is this ambiguity and mystery with his character as well that I liked in certain ways. Definitely fed into that spy thriller vibe that you feel, the tone that you want to feel with this movie. And he also has Palm Clementiev's character with him, sort of like not necessarily a sidekick, but someone that's working with him. Her character called Paris. And I like their characters, like their presence. And this is very much a part one, so maybe they'll go a little bit deeper. Not that they need to go too deep into their characters, but there was something that I was missing personally where I was like, I just didn't quite know what they're all about inside, I guess. They're very much surface level characters for me, it felt like. They're just like, oh yeah, they're working to help this AI that is going against all these people, and that's just pretty much what they're doing. They're trying to work to do this nefarious shit. There's really nothing below the surface at all, really, with any of the characters. I did like Palm Clemente. She was very menacing, her character. There's a very cool sequence in this movie where there's a very narrow alleyway where you have Ethan Hunt and Paris fighting Palm Clemente's character, and then another henchman right behind him, and he's basically trapped. Has each of them on both of his sides, and he has to fight them to get through. And this really just cool hand-to-hand combat in this movie. I already went into the chase sequence. That whole chase sequence in Rome is just, it's incredible, really. Watching it, you're like, how did they get this done? You have Ethan Hunt and Haley Atwell's character Grace just handcuffed through a lot of this sequence. In the featurette, they mentioned they actually upgraded a Fiat to put a different engine in it, I believe, to make it go faster, and just so many cool different ways to make these stunts work in these movies. And that's why there is such a spectacle to watch this. Much like a Top Gun Maverick, Tom Cruise just knows how to put these kind of movies out there, and he knows what it means to have a true great theater experience. And so you get that throughout this movie, and I just really enjoy this franchise, man. Another character that's in this movie, the White Widow, coming back, of course, since her recent appearance in the past couple movies. She, I thought, was really cool in this. Another character that had a little bit of a mystery. She's kind of in between everything here and trying to decide what she wants to do with all this. Again, this big MacGuffin that's in this movie, the key that they're trying to get that controls this AI, potentially can control this AI. In the second act of this movie, there's a huge, big scene that happens at this party. You've probably seen brief images of in the trailer if you haven't seen the movie yet. And there's this big just confrontation here where you have the White Widow here, you have Grace, Ethan Hunt is here, and also coming back in this movie, Rebecca Ferguson's character is also within this conversation. She's involved in some of the events in this movie, Ilsa Faust. So there's this big confrontation, very dialogue-driven scene that happens, and I will say, because this movie is about 3 hours long, I knew it was going into it. This part didn't drag for me here in the second act. It could have moved a little bit faster. Like, it didn't drag, but I was like, oh, okay, I kind of get where they're going with this. I see where this is heading to, the big third act sequence with the train. At that point, I was kind of wanted to push itself along a little bit faster, but that's really the only moment in this movie where I was like, okay, come on, let's just go a little bit faster here. But other than that, I think the movie is paced very well, to be honest, throughout. Of course, having the crew back here, Simon Pegg's character, Benji, of course, of being Rames's character, Luther, it's just so cool. They have such a good chemistry, Benji and Luther. Both the really tech-savvy guys, but the Simon Pegg's character obviously now getting out in the field every now and then. He has a really cool moment with an airport, very cool airport sequence near the beginning of this movie where you see Haley Atwell's character first comes about, and Simon Pegg, there's this potential threat in the airport. I will say that Simon Pegg's character, Benji, is specifically having to try and figure out how to handle, and it's a very fun sequence. Since he came into this franchise, he's really just fit very well, along with, of course, being Ram, just being a veteran in this franchise at this point. It's just so cool to see them back in this. And again, just Haley Atwell, she just fits so nicely in here. She has this very just like that sexy vibe while also just being a badass. Feel like she can handle herself. You're connected to her emotionally because she's just caught up in this, so you kind of feel for her in a way of like, oh man, she seems like a really nice person. I just wanted her to get out of this. She was just trying to do her own thing and just got caught up in this. So she's a really nice presence in this movie. More impressed than I thought I was even going to be with her character, Grace. You got Shea Wiggum and Greg Tarzan Davis in this movie as the two cops in this movie that, if you've seen this franchise enough, they're very much recurring type of characters, law enforcement that are going after Ethan Hunt in this movie. Even though, you know, the whole time as an audience member, they should not be going after Ethan Hunt. There's another presence to try and derail Ethan and his crew on what they're doing here. And of course, it feels like in almost every one of these movies, there's certain characters where they're like, they don't understand what's actually going on here. So they think Ethan Hunt is the true enemy here. And they very much play these characters, and they were very nice. They had even very typical cop names of Briggs and Dagos. That definitely felt very formulaic to what this franchise is at this point. I will say maybe the least fresh thing about this movie. The story overall, I think, just added a level of freshness with dealing with the AI here. As I said, even though it's been dealt with past several years in movies and TV shows. I thought they just did it really well in here and how they handled it within the story. And also, look, I love Across the Spider-Verse. I do understand, though, the complaint people had with that movie of it being clearly, of course, a part one and not really a satisfying ending whatsoever in terms of, especially if you didn't know it was going to be part one. I knew going into that movie that it was absolutely going to be a part one. There's going to be a Beyond the Spider-Verse coming out, so it didn't affect my viewing experience. But if you didn't know going into that, you might be pretty upset because you sat through a pretty long movie, an animated movie, and it just ends all of a sudden. This movie, at least, it clearly states in the title, part one, and there is a fairly satisfying ending to this movie. Like, this whole third act, again, just great action sequence. It ends in a way where you're like, okay, I watched a full movie and it had a completion to it, but it also set up a part two. I thought it did that very well, better than Across the Spider-Verse. As much as I give that 10 out of 10, I love that movie, but this movie isn't, I don't think, for me personally, as good as that. But in terms of that quality of it, being a part one and completing the story in the part one, you can watch this movie as a singular movie and not feel like you need to immediately watch part two. They do that really well in this movie. I could just wax philosophical all day about Tom Cruise, and even just the emotional level he brings to this movie isn't just the action stunts. You feel that he is Ethan Hunt in all these movies that I've watched in the past week. Every movie, you feel like he is this character. He's not Tom Cruise. He is playing Ethan Hunt, and you just believe everything. And a part of that, a big reason for that, is the fact that he does most of his own stunts. And it just really adds this level of realism. And I really wish, of course, not everyone's going to do the same crazy shit that Tom Cruise does, but you can still do your own stunts in a way, I feel like. And of course, it's just me talking. I've never been in a movie or anything where I'm like, I've done all this badass shit, but it would be nice to see that implemented a little more and just let's tone down the CGI a little bit. I get it's 2023 and it's just much easier to do that type of stuff, but you see how that's starting to clash a little bit with people's viewing experiences, especially with superhero stuff. But again, I'm not going to go on a tangent and all that stuff, but it's just nice to see this type of movie. It definitely has that same feel of like watching Top Gun Maverick. It's just a really great blockbuster movie, a classic blockbuster movie that's just done really well, shot awesome. Christopher McQuarrie obviously has such a great chemistry with Tom Cruise at this point. And of course, part two is going to be coming out, and I think it'll be really exciting to see where this story goes from here. Where this left off, it very much, you're like, okay, is Ethan Hunt going to get this done? Where is this going to go from here? And I'll be happy to see Haley Atwell's character hopefully be back. I just didn't really have much of really any major negatives with this movie, I will say, overall. Other than, I guess, my mixed aspect. I already talked about the second act of this movie. Didn't really necessarily even drag, just had a brief moment where I was like, okay, let's pick it up a little bit here. Other than that, the acting was all really well done. The action, tremendously shot. The stunts, just tremendously well done. Everything that has to do with the spy thriller of it all, mixing in that action adventure. There's a nice crescendo at the end of this movie. Intense third act, and then the whole movie is just so well shot, and the locations they go to, they really put their all into this blockbuster movie, and it definitely paid off, I feel. They just continue. They know exactly what these movies are supposed to be. They still can make fresh stories, as you can see with this movie, and I just really can't wait to see the second one of this. And I'll definitely want to go back and see this one. I didn't go see John Wick 4 again. I was really wanting to see that one. I really loved that movie. I don't think I quite loved this movie. I really liked it. If I see it again, though, I might turn into love, though, I will say. It is that good of a movie. It is definitely one of the better in the franchise, probably up there with Fallout. And for me personally, again, I like 3 and 4, so it is really tough on this franchise. There's so many consistently well-done films. But that's my main thoughts. I'm going to give Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 a 9 out of 10. This franchise continues to stay on that positive trajectory, and hopefully, this is the 7th of the franchise, so hopefully it won't fall off like the Fast and Furious franchise did after it peaked. Hopefully this can stay, maybe hit a plateau where it's just consistently good. It seems like it's that way so far, but hopefully it will stick that way. But what do you guys think? Have you seen this movie yet? Maybe you got a chance to go out and see it. Are you planning on seeing it at all? Maybe you don't care that much. If you do have a certain love for this franchise, what is your favorite movie in it, or you have any thoughts on the Mission Impossible movies, leave a comment down below, and also hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, and hit that subscribe button as always if you enjoyed this video. If you're a returning viewer, whatever, any support is always very much appreciated for this channel. You can also follow me on TikTok and add me on Snapchat, where I will post content similar to this, but for the most part, my content will be here on this YouTube channel, Not Your Average Josh. So again, I appreciate all the support. Thank you for joining in. I would maybe like to do a Mission Impossible ranking video at some point. I wanted to do it with Indiana Jones as well, but I kind of really touched on my ranking of it in a few of the reviews I did of those movies. So we'll see. I didn't get to review all these Mission Impossible movies, just too many movies to do. I just went ahead and watched them all so I could be caught up with the story and get into what this franchise is. But I wouldn't mind doing a ranking video at some point here if I do have the time. But anyways, that is it for now. Be looking for more videos very soon. I will talk to you guys later.